Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. In the summer of 2007, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced that there were design deficiencies in the levees which protect the American Bottoms area of Metro East. The Corps worried that those deficiencies could prevent them from certifying that the levees can protect the American Bottoms against a large flood. FEMA, based on the Corps' findings, announced a decision to de-accredit the levee systems. The reclassification of the American Bottoms as a special flood hazard area by FEMA will have a dramatic and chilling effect on economic growth and require most homeowners to buy flood insurance. The cost of correcting those deficiencies cited by the Corps is estimated at $170 to $450 million. To discuss this important issue is our guest, Les Sterman, Chief Supervisor for the Southwestern Illinois Flood Prevention District Council. Les Sterman, welcome to Conversation. That's quite a mouthful with
yes, it is.
All these titles.
And but then, you got it out, which is good.
And then you used to have a title and the works or something. Is that still in there?
It's actually still in there, but I don't use it very much. It's actually in the law. I didn't make up that title. It's in the law.
I remember you've been, let's see, it's been about, I think, 18 months, 19 months since the last time you were here with us. And at that time, you were still more in the formative stage of trying to figure out where you stood and what needed to be done. But a lot has happened since then, hasn't it? So why don't you just bring us up to date over the last year and a half?
We've been going 100 miles an hour, and fortunately, we've been getting around the track pretty well. We actually developed a plan to make the improvements to the levee system that will be necessary to get accreditation from FEMA. We're most of the way through the design. Design will be mostly completed by the end of this year.
Now, you're an engineer, right?
Yes.
So you actually know that this is actually happening correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
And
you're not just some politician who's overseeing this thing.
No, I'm not born to be a politician.
Okay.
I'm really just a problem solver, I hope.
Okay, go ahead.
And we've got our first round of financing in place. We sold bonds for about $94 million worth of bonds, and we've got a good, pretty firm cost estimate. So we know now, we didn't at the time I first talked to you, that we have enough money to do the job. We believe we can get FEMA accreditation of these levees and basically assure everybody that they're safe and protected from a flood hazard for the money that we've got coming in off of the quarter-cent sales tax that was passed a couple of years ago. So we've actually come a long way. In theory, we could be under construction in the first quarter of next year, with construction substantially complete by 2014, and then all the paperwork submitted for accreditation in 2015. So a lot's happened over the last 18 months or so.
Well, let's just remind people, what was it that the Corps saw that made them nervous?
The issues with the levee system, it's not the height of the levee or the location of the levee, anything like that. It's what's known as underseepage. So during periods of high water, when the Mississippi is stacked up against the levee and exerting a lot of downward force on the river bottom, water can come under the levee and come up on the land side, which is not necessarily a problem if you've made provisions for it. It gets to be a real problem when it's not just water that travels under the levee, but it brings sand with it, basically the foundation of the levee, which ultimately could lead to the failure and collapse of the levee. So what we've got to do is control this underseepage problem. Water can come under, but we've got to do it in a controlled way so it's not eroding the foundation of the levee. And we've got to make provisions for either pumping that water back into the river or storing it in some fashion so that we preserve the stability of the levee system. So that's pretty much the nature of the technical solutions we've got to do. We won't be digging up any levees or adding to their height. We're actually at a level that exceeds the level of protection needed for a 500-year flood. And I guess I should point out also that back in '93, which was the flood of record, biggest flood we've ever had in the Mississippi in this area, roughly a 300 to 350 year flood, the levee system actually worked. It was a little touch and go, and we needed to do quite a bit of flood fighting to make sure that none of that under seepage got out of control. But nonetheless, the levee system did work. The FEMA standard is protection against a 100-year flood. So it's quite a bit less than what we had experienced in 93. So I think we feel like we're in pretty good shape. There's a few concerns out there that we can talk about that could prevent us from reaching that goal.
Mm-hmm. Now, from what I thought I just heard you say was that back in 93 there was actually this seepage of water underneath the ground, underneath the levees, and that water was coming up on the other side. Is that right?
That's correct.
And and you also said something about sand, which means actually the foundation underneath it is eroding and being pushed up by this water. Did that happen too, or just the water?
Yeah, there were, and those are known as sand boils, which we hear about every time there's a story about a flood. And there are ways of controlling those sand boils so that they don't continue or get out of control. And generally a process known as flood fighting, and the Corps of Engineers and our local levee districts all are well traveled in that sort of experience, so they know what to do. And so it's a question of observing carefully, identifying sand boils when they happen, and then controlling them when they happen. Ideally, you would not like there to be any sand boils at all, and that of course is our goal, but there are ways of controlling, and that's what was done in 93, and then again later on in 95 and 2008.
Right. Okay. Now, in 93, we had that enormous flood. Okay, but as I said at the beginning in the opening script, I said 2007 that the Corps was looking at this, and I was thinking like, what was that all about? Oh yeah, Katrina. So in my reading, I mean, let's be straight about it. In my reading, there was a whole bunch of stuff about speculation that the federal government is simply trying to avoid liabilities like they had in the Katrina flood. Is that what this is, that the government suddenly got, oh my goodness, and so then they threw on all this extra worry?
I think there are a number of factors that led to that. Certainly the process that you're describing is part of it. I mean, clearly all the federal agencies have gotten a lot more risk averse. No one wants to be blamed for the next Katrina. So the Corps of Engineers, if we actually have a failure, they want to be able to say, look, we warned you that this might happen, and here it did. I think on the FEMA side of it, there is, of course, a national flood insurance program, so the federal government actually subsidizes flood insurance. That program is about $18 billion in the red between Katrina and also some of the other disasters that we've had over the last decade or so. That program has lost money, and the federal government has had to put money out of the general treasury into that program to cover that gap. So obviously there's a lot of, the Congress is basically saying to FEMA, look, we want you to be able to sit on your own fiscal bottom here. So in other words, you've got to collect a lot more in premiums in order to be able to close that gap. And the way you do that is by collecting premiums from people who are not likely to flood. We've never had a flood in this area. So
I've read this story, and I think that, didn't I read that the chairman of Madison County Board had made that assertion back like a year and a half ago, that, hey, that's what's going on here. They just want us to put in some extra money to cover their shortages.
Yeah,
I'm not making you say this.
Right.
I'm just,
a number of folks around the country have said that, and essentially the Congress has been pretty plain about it. We want this to be a self-sustaining program. And much like health insurance, which only works if healthy people pay in, so that sick people will have the resources to pay for their treatment, it's the same way. And there are areas in this country that flood repeatedly, particularly on the coasts. So that concerns us. Obviously, we'd be paying significant premiums, totaling somewhere between $20 and $50 million a year, and not recovering much, if any, of that here, and that's going to pay off claims elsewhere. The other factor, I think, is clearly, this is infrastructure in this country is aging, and it's deteriorating over time. and it does need to be addressed. And engineering standards have changed. We know a lot more about how to design facilities like this. So there are some legitimate reasons for it, but I think the things that we have problems with are the bureaucracy becoming so risk averse that we have to pay the price for that, for them covering themselves in case there is another disaster like Katrina, or paying to fix somebody else's problem, as we would have to do in the case of FEMA.
Now, in the beginning of the show, I said 170 to 450 million dollars. What number? You said that you're in the design phase right now. What number do you expect to come to?
We're about $160 million overall.
60 million.
And again, that's to get to the FEMA required level of protection, which is this 100-year level of protection.
So what's the difference between a $160 million improvement and a $450 million improvement?
Well, it's kind of a moving target. We don't even know what the Corps of Engineers estimate is now. They've given us estimates as high as $500 million, and that doesn't even consider inflation. They've also told us it would take them till 2044 to get to that level of protection, which is clearly unacceptable to us.
You mean you have to wait for, if they were to do the work?
Yeah, if they were to do the work, they've got to get congressional appropriations every year. They go through a torturous process of authorizing projects and designing them, and studies on top of studies. Really is kind of out of control in a way. So it takes them a long, long time to do a project. I think the average Corps project takes 22 years to do something like that. And that's a topic for another day. But clearly that's not something we can live with. So we've got to move faster. We've got to be much more cost effective in how we approach the problem. I mean, based on what I've seen, we can literally do the same amount of construction as the Corps for half of the cost or even less.
Well, that sounds about right in terms of private versus public.
Well, this is not necessarily. I mean, the Corps of Engineers, from what I've learned over the last couple of years, is sort of a unique federal bureaucracy. And some of the requirements they deal with are imposed by Congress, but others are of their own making. And they just make everything more costly and more time consuming.
So now you said that you're earlier on. You said, well, we're not going to be digging up, existing piles of dirt and changing that out. So what is it that you have to actually accomplish in order to make the Corps and FEMA happy?
Well, we've got to control under seepage, and there are several ways of doing that. The most costly but most effective way is simply what's something known as a cutoff wall, and basically that is a vertical wall through the levee, either through the middle of the levee, the crown, or on the river side of the levee. It's a several foot thick concrete wall going all the way down to bedrock.
Now, I've read about this. Okay, and it said in the articles that I read that you're only doing that in spots, not throughout the entire land.
Yeah, it's enormously expensive, requires specialized equipment, because in some cases bedrock can be 160 feet below the ground surface. So you're digging a trench 160 feet down and having to take precautions so it doesn't collapse as you're digging it. So it's very, very expensive, and not very few contractors can actually do that. So we are using it in spots where we have no other choice, but we would prefer not to. We also can do something called relief wells, which is essentially a well pipe. That's a vertical pipe with screens in the side that's sunk into the ground, so that water can come through this well, but not sand. We screen out the sand, and then that water comes to the surface, or it's piped someplace where it can be pumped out through a pump station.
Kind of like a sump pump.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Pretty primitive, but it works. The other principal solution is what's known as a sand berm or a seepage berm, which essentially pretty simple. You just pile sand up against the land side of the levee, and that does two things. It exerts force, downward force on the ground to counteract that water pressure coming up, but it also allows some water to come up through the sand itself, but without eroding that foundation. So those are the three principal methods that we use to control under seepage. So there'll be a lot of activity that I think that people will see in certain spots, but it's not going to be, reinforcing or building up the levee.
You're not getting to do this, well, you said you're starting to do this work come the first part of 2012, or at least you hope to.
Yeah.
Right? What would prevent you from getting started on that in early 2012?
The biggest cloud on the horizon, and it is a very big cloud, getting back to the Corps of Engineers, the Corps has the authority under federal law to grant permission for others to make modifications to the levee system.
They own it?
They don't own it. It's owned by local levee districts, but the federal government built the levees to begin with back in the 1940s and 50s.
Right.
So basically this is, quote, safeguarding the federal investment. It's not an unreasonable thing to do. But essentially there's a provision in the law, it's one phrase, not even a whole sentence, that says we can't do anything injurious to the public interest. In other words, we can't do any harm. So anybody who wants to put a pipeline through the levee or put a road on top of the levee has to go to the Corps of Engineers, and the Corps has to certify that they're not doing any harm. They're not diminishing the level of flood protection. Pretty simple. And obviously that's all we're doing is meant to improve the levee system. Unfortunately, the Corps has taken that one simple phrase and spun that out into pages and pages and pages of guidance, which basically, the Corps is basically saying to us, well, the only way we can truly certify if you're doing no harm to the levee system is if you designed it, built it, and do all the same studies that we would do as if we were building these improvements. Well, obviously, that's not something we want to do, because that's, there's the $500 million project. We have no interest in doing things exactly like the Corps would do them. And that's not in law, it's not in regulation, it's simply internal guidance. So we're fighting that, but if we have to abide by that direction, it could delay the project by a year or more. And other areas around the country are going through the same process. We've been talking to folks in Dallas and Sacramento, and it's kind of a bureaucratic nightmare. We've got to fix that. I mean, it's not adding any value to the project. And we have one of the world's largest engineering companies doing the design. It's being checked. We have our own folks that we brought on board to check their design. There's really no issue here. But I mean, this is part of the bureaucracy that we have to deal with.
Under what department is the Corps? Like what secretary?
It's in the Department of the Army.
But I mean, and above them, I mean, all the way up to who sits in the cabinet that controls this?
Well, I guess it's Defense Department, but
Oh, really? So the Corps comes under.
Well, the Corps is a unit of the Army. And
so the Defense Secretary is ultimately responsible here for whether or not they want to make the political decision to let you do it yourself.
Right, and our congressional delegation, bipartisan, has been just terrific in this. The 4 members of our delegation, the 2 senators, 2 congressmen, have met with the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, who theoretically supervises the Corps, and she agreed with our position. Unfortunately, we've been unable to get the bureaucracy to actually implement her direction in this case.
Well, let's assume you get the permission, okay, and you get to start building sometime in 2012. How long do you expect it to last? And second part, how is this being financed?
We hope to get most or all the construction completed, say, in 2014. Then there's a whole lot of paperwork that has to be developed and sent in to FEMA in order to get these levees accredited. There are also, I shouldn't neglect to mention, there are 2 segments of the levee system that are either owned by the Corps or where they have responsibility for fixing the problem. Another wrinkle in this is that they have said they can't certify those sections of levee, even though they're responsible for them and they've implemented the fixes. So we have to bring in our own engineers to do that, and that's another possible wrinkle in the future. But assuming all that works out, we're done in 2015 or thereabouts, we'll be in good shape. The financing is coming from bonds that we're selling and paying off with the proceeds of a 1/4-cent sales tax that was passed by the legislature and our county boards.
This is over a multiple series of counties, isn't it?
Over 3 counties, Madison, Monroe, and St. Clair. And that tax has been collected since January of 2009 as a 1/4-cent sales tax. Brings in about $11 million a year. So we're using that to pay principal and interest on the bonds. We've had one bond issue for about $94 million, and we will probably have 2 more over the course of the project to finish out the financing.
So 11, 12 million a year, that's going to be a lot of years till you get to that 160 million mark.
Yeah, it's going to take 25 to 30 years to pay off those bonds.
Is this certification going to hold over this whole period, or are they going to come back at some point and say, well, still not good enough?
Well, the main certification is essentially good for 10 years, so hopefully we can pass that hurdle. I think the system is going to be in good a shape as it's ever been. 10, 15 years from now, who can predict what the standards are going to be? They seem to be a moving target these days.
Well, if say in 2014, no, let's say you're done, so it's 2015, 2016, and you've now got another 1993 flood, or maybe just slightly more than that. What would you anticipate things would look like at that time?
Well,
for the levee system, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the '93 flood was,
because there's going to be another flood. There's always another flood out there somewhere.
No question, no one can guarantee that these levees will never fail. That's just sort of the nature of it.
Right.
But it did function well the last time. It's going to be in better shape when we finish. So presumably with the proper attention and maintenance and flood fighting when the time comes, I think we'll be okay.
There are anti-levee people out there who think that the best thing we could do is rip down all the levees across the Mississippi River and simply let water go where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go there. It's always gone there, they would say, and just leave it alone and let it act natural. What's the mistake that they're making, if they're making a mistake in that philosophy?
Well, I'm not unsympathetic to that view, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong.
That's an unexpected answer, sir. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's like everything else in life. It's not a simple situation. I think there's no question that we shouldn't be building new levees to protect unprotected floodplain. I mean, if I were in charge, I wouldn't have rebuilt the levees in Chesterfield after '93. I mean,
Oh yeah, they got that huge mall area down there.
Right. I mean,
right there at Boone's Crossing.
There was no public purpose in a new shopping mall.
A lot of money, a lot of tax money generated.
It's not new tax money though. It's tax money that we were paying in some other retail center. There's only so many retail dollars in our pockets. So that to me was not a worthwhile investment. And we've protected land that clearly shouldn't be protected. Our area is a little different. I mean, it's been settled for hundreds of years. We've got huge industries here, ConocoPhillips, Solutia, U.S. Steel, all of which need rail access and access to the river. Again, we're dealing with hundreds of years of growth. That decision was essentially made for us, several hundred years ago. We can't undo that. And to take 155,000 people and move them out of the floodplain, many of whom are poor.
That's all the way from the river to basically the bluffs, which would be Illinois 157.
It's a huge area that's been settled for a long, long time. It's got a lot of history, obviously. So I mean, it doesn't make sense do that. And so I think in that kind of situation, we're restoring a levee that's already there. This land's been protected for decades, centuries even. There's land in other areas, in southern Illinois that's purely agricultural, and I'm not sure you can make a case for levees protecting that area either. So again, it's not a simple answer. I think in general, yeah, we should avoid trying to build in floodplains wherever we can, but there are cases like this where it's a densely developed urban area where you just somebody else made that decision, rightly or wrongly, a long time ago.
We got about 3 minutes left before the end here. I told you it goes by fast. You mentioned the out in St. Louis County. Is your flood prevention district in any way associated with Missouri, or you have no connection to Missouri?
We talk to folks there all the time, and in fact we use the same legal counsel, so we actually have a pretty good understanding of what everybody's doing. But again, it's one of those quirks of the federal government where it's a different federal region. So it's a different FEMA region, for example. So that they're doing things, and some of their standards are a little different on one side of the river from another, and their timing is different. All of which causes us some frustration, to be honest.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to get out here in the last minute or two?
No, I don't think so. I think the basic bottom line is that we're moving forward as best we can. If we can get the federal government to get out of our way, I think we're going to be just fine.
When are you going to know whether or not the Corps is going to allow you to proceed the way that you are planning to proceed?
I think we'll know in the next few months. Again, we are...
Before the end of this 2011, well, this program is being shown, you're probably being seen somewhere around Christmas time of this year. Right now, it's just so people know, this is October 25th we're talking, so they're seeing this around Christmas, New Year's time.
Well, I hope by the time people see this show, this is resolved in our favor, and we'll certainly know something by then. We are doing everything we can right now to try to get this straightened out.
And assuming that it is, then you expect to start construction in the spring?
Yeah, probably some early construction, towards late spring or thereabouts, and then towards the end of the year, we'll be under full steam ahead.
So you got 2012, 2013, and hope to finish up in 2014, 2015 at the...
Yeah, and it's a delicate balance between how quickly we can raise money and how we sequence construction projects and try to keep everything in balance.
And one quick last question. Are people going to be forced to buy flood insurance? That's like yes or no.
I hope not.
Okay. Sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you very much
okay.
for being with us today. We're going to have you back again probably in not that many months just to find out where you stand. And to my audience, I've been speaking with Les Sterman. He's with the Illinois Flood Prevention District. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next week. Thanks. We're out of time. Bye.